This is Mara and Ben for Stellar Strategy Gaming, and today we're kind of doing a recap on our opinions on the DLC for Age of Empires 2, Age of Kings, which included both Bohemians and Poles. What you're seeing is a game I was playing. I'm the blue guys. I played as the Poles against the Bohemians, and we'll be not necessarily narrating what was going on the screen as much as just talking about our opinions of the two factions. Now, Mara, I know you had a chance to play as both. Tell me what some of your thoughts on them were.
My thought for both of them is actually the same for my first criticism, and then I'll go into what I like about them a little bit after that. But my first and main criticism is the fact that none of them have anything which finishes the game. Honestly, playing Bohemians felt a lot like playing Byzantium, in my opinion, where they have a good tech tree and they have some really strong abilities, but they just don't have anything which finishes the game, you know? And with the Poles, it was sort of like that. In fact, my issue was more the fact that they had a unit which, in my opinion, should have been able to finish the game, which is the Winged Hussar, which everyone who studied the Polish and honestly any part of Eastern European history will know. The Winged Hussar, it was the earliest equivalent of a heavily armored unit that could really change the course of the battle. In fact, Hussars still played a major role in World War II at the end of modern cavalry. So the fact that we have the Winged Hussars in this game under the Polish faction, and they do absolutely nothing, in my opinion, is kind of depressing, especially because I forget which faction it is, but another faction gets a unit called the Hussar, which is very similar, but that one is so much better. So I'm wondering why something which should be so good and historically has wiped out armies at a time is so objectively terrible.
For anyone who's not a complete history nerd and or hasn't watched my video on the Poles, the Winged Hussars are of fame. They were actually cavalry that was still in use after gunpowder came into use. Apart from being very fast, well-armed and armored elite cavalry, they also wore wooden wings that created this awful clattering noise. And in the confusion of battle, it actually made it harder for gunners to know what they were shooting at. In other words, you couldn't see a clear outline of a horse and rider because the wings were in the way. And it cost more to research winged hussars than regular hussars. Whichever one it is you're talking about that has something, it's like HUSZARs as their specialty unit, it's their unique unit, so you research it in the castle. Whereas with the Poles, it's just a different form of the hussars that other civils can get, but it's more expensive to get it. And you're right, it's not a definitive unit. I love hussars as units in this game. Having a strong light cavalry unit to just keep harassing the enemy and sort of driving them into submission is an amazing ability, but we're not getting that with these Winged Hussars. As you say, they're not a definitive unit. Now, with the Bohemians, I actually did play a player versus player game where somebody played them very well. And what this person did was they organized what amounted to just this mob of pikemen that were protecting a bunch of cannon. And so they were able to get to the Imperial Age, sort of hold their own to the Imperial Age, and then attack that way. But there again, you're right. It wasn't winning the battle definitively as much as it was just, I can knock buildings down.
Yes, and with the Bohemians, the other thing I'll say is that it's not a requirement for gunpowder civilizations, but I like to see unique gunpowder siege units, and technically the Bohemians have a gunpowder unit which is unique to them, which is the weird little box chariot things that we've actually seen in this game a few times, just washing it on the sidelines. But here's the thing, when I tried to use them, I couldn't figure out how they worked, simply put. Targeting them felt clumsy and awkward, which is not a good thing when unit pathing in this game is already kind of clumsy and awkward. In fact, it's the only criticism other than graphics which holds up about this game right now. And so the fact that we had an entire unit which just shows like 6 different rifles pointing out of a different part of a chariot, or whatever that thing was, and yet they could only target one unit at a time feels weird to me. And supposedly they can also block damage going to other units, but I've never seen that to be useful. And I've now actually played 2 games of Bohemians, and I've still not figured out how that ability works. So it's not even useful in blocking other units. And given that they cost 225 gold and 225 wood, which is more than a trebuchet, and they have significantly less range, I'm wondering, why are they worth it?
So interestingly enough, just as you said that, you saw some of my cavalry chase one of those down and destroy it. Again, getting deeply nerdy with the history. During the Hussite rebellion against Catholic rule in Bohemia, the Hussite soldiers were mostly peasants. They didn't have a lot of knights or nobles of any kind. So they developed this strategy where they would essentially make a hollow square with their wagons. So if you're trying to do a cavalry charge against that, it's just not happening. And especially if you've got men with muskets and things like that, they were very primitive rifles. I don't think they were even muskets at that point. But if you have men with firearms, it's going to be a real bad day for your knights trying to charge at that. And it's weird that these things don't get strong bonuses against cavalry for that reason. You would think that they would be all but impervious to cavalry, and it's actually kind of the opposite. If you see this, I'm using light cavalry, and I'm just owning these things with it, and now I'm following up with Kniggets. But the point is, like, what these things should be vulnerable to is infantry, because what it would be vulnerable to would be like light infantry who could crawl over the thing and hack their way through.
Honestly, what I saw watching that was more that the skirmishers, the spear throwers, I think those are the skirmishers, were doing significantly more damage to your cavalry than these gun things were.
Yes, that's something else I've noticed about them is they're not useful as a siege unit because they don't do enough damage to bring things like castles down, and they don't fire quickly enough. You know, it's not something like where you could have like 10 guys in one of these and they're just going to open up on it. And you can see that the AI here is, you know, it's they're after it, but they're just not achieving it. They're after it in terms of they're launching major attacks. If these were the Korean war wagons, which the game obviously based these things on, then it would be a lot more effective. And you see, like, I'm actually kind of in a bad way here for a minute because they've got a lot of these things, but they're just getting picked apart by my men. The Poles also have these weird little dudes with what look like scythes.
Oh yeah, those guys. A little bit of background for my play style. I tend not to tech rush as much. Well, I do tech rush, but I go down a very specific path. In fact, Ben's commented on this in previous games, but I'll just focus on the special unit for whatever civilization I'm playing, which I've regretted both times playing the Polish and the Bohemians, because with the Polish, their units, I get that it felt like I was playing the Aztecs because of how cheap the units were, but they did significantly less damage than the Aztecs did. Aztec units are a bit of glass cannons, but the key word is they're still cannons. With these things, they're glass, but they lack the cannon part, so they're completely worthless for the bang for the buck, which means that all of my investment into them was for naught. In fact, had I realized just how weak they were, I would have spec'd into something else entirely. And part of the reason why I bring this up is I know that perhaps in ranked and all that, specifically focusing on the special unit isn't the best idea. But my point is that every other civilization besides the Bohemians and the Polish, you can really focus that main unit and create something really, really strong. You can't do that here.
Yes, with the English, with the longbow archer, like those things can be devastating if you use them right. The Viking berserkers are kind of they're interesting in that they're somewhat unimaginative as a unit, but ludicrously effective. And ludicrously effective from an early stage. And their special techs upgrade specifically the berserkers, which is great. The Koreans with their war wagons. I don't understand why the Korean war wagon is so much more effective than the Bohemian one. I also like this Polish unique unit, this infantry unit. I wouldn't say it's bad. My understanding is that when it hits things, it permanently depletes that thing's armor.
It ignores them entirely.
Okay, so it's not bad. It's just it doesn't necessarily gel with anything else the unit is doing. I mean, seems to be primarily a cavalry civ.
Yeah, well, and the other issue with that is ignoring armor is theoretically good. The reality of the situation is that, especially for infantry special unit civs, I find mixed attacks are all but necessary in order to really get anything done. You just have to have a few of everything to make it come together. And so, with their special armor ignoring unit, it'll ignore the armor while they fire, but it's not getting rid of the armor for the things that are following up. Those still have to punch through the armor, and by the time they do that, your units that could ignore the armor tend to be dead because of their shorter range than crossbowmen, which, for a gunpowder civilization, still makes very little sense.
Yeah. Now, what you were talking about the glass cannon, but lack of the actual cannon. So with the Aztecs, I forget exactly the terminology behind it, but they do get a bonus in the Imperial Age. One of their unique techs gives every infantry unit a significant bonus to its attack. So it's the kind of thing where you can just spam whatever infantry you have. I usually use the Jaguar Warriors and the Eagle Warriors because those are the strongest to them. So you have something that you can just sort of spam at the enemy and just know that it's going to work. Now, with the Polish, it's kind of interesting here. I mentioned this in my video about the Polish. You can't go all the way up to Paladin for their heavy cavalry. So you're kind of, yeah. And it's weird because one of the big buffs they get in the Castle Age is making knights cheaper, making the knight line cheaper. So you can't go all the way up to Paladin, plus you can't do full armor upgrades on them.
Which would make sense if the Winged Hussar was anywhere near as strong as it was supposed to be. But it's not.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is, you don't get the full benefits from the Winged Hussars.
And finally, the other thing I'm going to see here is, in my opinion, the army that we're seeing you move in with here is just way too large, in the sense that I've seen you and I win at separate occasions with significantly smaller but better forces. The fact that you have to dump so many resources into both infantry and cavalry here, and the fact that you can't command them together because the infantry will slow the cavalry down, and at least from my understanding, unless you command them separately, means that you're dead in multiplayer, first off. And on top of that, it means that you have to spend so many more of your resources, which, as much as I understand that the Wonder Victory is one of the least popular out there, the amount of gold you have to spend for Polish units means that you can't even get one of the three main types of victories just guaranteed, which is a fundamental flaw in game design, in my opinion.
Yes, and the way I actually discovered that this was even a thing, I mean, I remember seeing ads for it when I went to play the game, but the way I realized it was already out was that I actually was playing a game against somebody who played as Poles, and I'm not a very highly rated player in competitive play, so I do wind up playing against a lot of people who essentially don't really know what they're doing and don't always play well. Who doesn't love crushing noobs? But I just haven't gotten the ranks high enough to where I'm up against people who necessarily provide a real challenge. Point is, though, like, I was playing Vikings, and it wasn't just that I won, it was that I completely crushed the other person. Like, it wasn't even starting to be close. I wiped out all of his villagers without him ever being in a position to launch any kind of significant counteroffensive or even a particularly meaningful defensive effort. So, yeah, and on our video about why the Lithuanians are overpowered, somebody did comment that the designers wanted to create another OP civilization in addition to some of the ones that there already are, and there are a few. The thing is, if you're going to create an OP civilization in a game like this, you kind of get into the issue of, back when I was into Magic the Gathering, people talked about power creep.
Oh yeah, I remember this. Every expansion up until late Zendikar had severe power creep issues. And then at the end of Zendikar, when they started going back into Innistrad stuff, they just decided, we're going to go back to how Magic the Gathering was before major power creep, which wasn't a thing ever, in my opinion. But on top of that, it meant that Innistrad was the worst expansion in any proper tournament.
I think you're thinking of Ixalan, which, if you are, you're right.
Well, there was also the Shadows over Innistrad, which it wasn't as bad as Ixalan, but you did start to notice that. Like, there were less game-ending cards there.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a good thing. Except if you're in a tournament, and this might be a little off topic from this game, but if you're in a tournament and you're allowed to play 8 expansions back, and your newest expansion, your newest and cheapest, which is what new players to the game will have, is the weakest, then it's going to kill the game.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're seeing here.
Yes, and I would say to you, I mean, yeah, it's a little off topic in that it's a different game, but you want to win, and you want to have a clear way of this is how you win. Now, it is getting to be time for us to wrap this up. Mara, what are your closing thoughts?
Well, my closing thoughts is that sadly I cannot recommend this to anyone. In fact, my original plan was to get this as a gift for you for your birthday, and now I'm glad I didn't, because this would be an underwhelming birthday gift.
I'm glad you didn't too, because I expect you to spend more than $10 for my birthday. I hope you found this interesting and enjoyable. We will be doing more game reviews in the near future, and as always, we thank you for watching. We thank you for listening. Please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, etc., etc. We have videos in the works. I'm not even going to get into what's next. We have videos in the works for Overwatch. We have videos in the works for whatever that new tank game is.
War Thunder.
War Thunder, and of course our bread and butter is D&D. We look forward to seeing you on the next one.